Hey y'all, I'm Kylie of Kiley in Kentucky, and today I'm going to show you a very fun and I believe very easy to follow tutorial on how to do Watercolor Galaxy lettering using Tombow dual brush pens as watercolors, which is actually my favorite way to use them. We're going to be trying out the new Galaxy palette they've recently come out with, which is all colors made to work together to create a beautiful galaxy sort of like pattern that is really magical and really awesome. So I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. This is the piece of art we're going to be creating today. I had a lot of fun doing this, and this is probably my favorite project that I've done in a while. I'm really excited to show you all how we're going to do this, so let's go ahead and get started.
First things first, I'm taking a piece of regular copy paper. You could also use graph paper or notebook paper, really anything you want that's pretty thin to do your initial sketch on. So this part is not going to be in any way a part of our final result, so don't worry about getting too fancy or too perfect here because it doesn't have to be perfect. We're going to make it much prettier in our next step. So you can see me just literally scribbling things out, going over words and letters 2 and 3 times until it's correct. That's just how I do it. That's how I like to do it. And I'm going to be placing the copy paper on my Bright Pad. And this is a Cricut Bright Pad. It has several different levels of brightness, which I absolutely love, but you could also hold your project up to a window in the daytime to do tracing as well. And I'm going to be doing my watercolor on a mixed media paper. It's not quite as thick as watercolor paper, but it still holds the watercolor pretty well, and I like the texture of it. So, and I have it in my stash. So, alright, so now I'm placing my copy paper onto my Bright Pad. It is at the highest brightness right now, and then I'm putting my mixed media paper on top and getting it lined up exactly where I want it to be. And I'm pressing down, you can see in just a second on the screen, because there is just a little bit of static energy that holds the paper onto the screen, which is a pretty cool feature. So for my watercolors today, I'm going to be using the Tombow dual brush pens in the Galaxy palette. There is an accompanying blog post that has swatches and names and everything, all the details on this palette that I will have linked in the video description. So if you want some more information about it, you can click on that blog post and go there. To hold my watercolors, instead of using a palette, I've got 2 blending kit sheets, and these things are awesome. They're also by Tombow. They're just like a slick plastic surface. It's plain on one side, and then they have a color wheel on the other side, which is really handy. And I use these all the time for blending, but also to hold my Tombows when I'm using them as watercolors, which FYI is my favorite way to use them. So to apply the watercolors onto my palette, I'm literally going to just scribble each one of these colors onto the palette. And the reason I have 2 is because I want to get some different color combinations going. So I'm going to be putting each color on each palette, but just in a different spot, as you can see, so that I'm getting a different variety of colors mixing together. And this is really, I think, the key to using this palette as watercolors is that you want to get the most color combinations as possible. We're also setting the gray pen that comes in the palette to the side because we're using that later on. So I've got a tapered round brush, and that's what I'm using for my watercolor lettering. I've got some clean water on the side here, and I'm just going to show you how I apply the water to the palette. You just kind of get your brush like soaking wet, I guess, and then you put it onto the colors and sort of mix them together. And that's how we're going to be using these as watercolors. They come onto the brush really wonderfully, and it looks like legit watercolor. Also looks like really high quality watercolor, which is why I love using these. I've just got my brush really wet, which I think is the key. You want it to have a lot of water in it because that's how you're going to get really beautiful puddles of color that dry in really cool ways. And if you're getting your brush really wet, the watercolor will stay within the confines of wherever it is wet on the paper, if that makes sense. I really hope I'm explaining this okay. But as you can see here, I'm kind of just going in and I'm dropping even more color into the wet puddle where the letter is so that it will stay inside those lines, but it'll also create some dimension and it'll just look really cool. Moving on, I'm doing a little pink and purple mixture here, and this pink shows up so vibrantly. It's so pretty. And as you can see, again, my brush was holding a lot of water because that pink showed up in a really vibrant puddle on the A and on the G. So really here, all I can emphasize is that you've got to have a lot of water in your brush to create the awesome watercolor dimension, like the cool, I don't even know what you call it, like little puddles of color that dry and kind of look like tie-dye. That's what it reminds me of anyway. Now we're going for some black and blue. The black actually looks so good and it really helps to give the feeling of a galaxy within your letters. Another really great reason to use a light pad like this is that you don't have to erase pencil marks, which is what really can ruin a watercolor piece, is having to erase pencil marks from a sketch. So I love using my Bright Pad for that reason. I've been doing much more watercoloring since I got it because this is kind of now my process. But if you don't have a Bright Pad, you could hold a light or something under a glass coffee table or a glass table and then hold your piece on top. Listen, I used to do that all the time. It works. It's a little more complicated or whatever, but no one has to know that's what you did, right? So finally I'm done, but I didn't think there was enough of the green color, so a fun trick is literally just put some green back on that palette. It doesn't have to be hard, doesn't have to be complicated. So I'm just going to drop some more green onto the S's there because I just didn't feel like there was enough variation with that color. So we're done, and you can see it's already started to dry and it's making really cool textures, and it really does look like a galaxy, and it's gonna look even more like a galaxy in the next step. So I've got two brushes here, a large brush and a small brush. I've got two acrylic paints, a white and a gold. And I'm just going to put some white paint onto this little folded up piece of paper. Don't have to get fancy. And I'm just going to be using this brush to splatter some paint onto my letters. And I'm wetting the brush a little bit because that makes it just a little bit easier with acrylic paint. So this looks ridiculous. This brush actually didn't work and my fingers were pretty soaked in white paint. So I was not happy about that. I tried a different brush, a much stiffer brush, and it worked 10 times better. So I'm just taking a small detail brush and adding little dots of white there to give brighter star looking patterns all across my letters. I'm going to do the same with the gold, just using the exact same brush. You hardly need any gold. Probably I used way too much, but I just love the effect that the gold gives. You could also use a gold pen if you have one. I do not have one, so gold paint works just fine. So after all of that has dried, we're going to be adding in some shadows to give it even more dimension and texture, and it just makes it pop a little bit. So I'm using that gray brush pen, and I'm just going to really lightly and with really no precision at all just add some shadows to the left side of all of my letters. And I know a lot of people will probably be like, oh, I need help figuring out where to add shadows. It's really hard. For me, it's very difficult for me to figure out when I was first lettering where I was supposed to add shadows, but if you just practice, think about if you have a light shining to one side, where are the shadows going to appear? So in this case, it's like the light is coming in from the right side and everything on the left is shadowed. So that's a good way to think about it, but it is kind of tricky when you're first starting out. But it really makes everything pop. So you can skip this step if it's too difficult for you. I'm acting like this is really super hard, but sometimes it can be kind of tricky and frustrating, and you want it to look correct, or at least I do.
So that was it. I loved making this for you, and I hope you liked it just as much as I did. You can let me know, good or bad, at Kiley in Kentucky on Instagram, pretty much everywhere actually, KileyInKentucky.com. There is an accompanying blog post for this video that includes swatches of all of the colors in the Galaxy palette if you are interested in learning more about it, as well as where you can buy your very own palette. So that is linked in the video description. See you later. Bye.